official debate. We have CoolDog, we have Deonteleologist. CoolDog is holding the proposition that something that has meaning is something that you care about. Deonteleologist is taking the opposition. As always, winner will be based upon who conceives. No concessions made. We'll put it to a voting poll in which the audience can vote on who they think performed better in the debate. No time limit this debate. You guys can get started.
Yeah, first I'd just like to thank everybody listening and my opponent for sticking out for a second round. I'm sure it'll be an interesting debate. When I originally conceived of this proposition, it was more of like a play on words, and there's a trivial sense in which it can be interpreted. However, um, we are when we are discussing the meaning of meaning, things get rather tricky, especially when we are equating it with such a notion of care. In one sense, the aforementioned trivial sense, something has meaning, and this just simply means that you care about it. However, in the non-trivial sense, the sense that I'm defending, the fact that something has meaning, personal significance, and in the extreme cases can be an anchor for your very identity. This then implies a normative sense of care that is merely not a recognition of importance. Here I am arguing that if something has meaningful significance to you, that there is a moral, normative implication that naturally follows along with that. I am not here committed to any particular view of morality or ethics, simply that when we are placed in front of meaning and significance, we cannot help but to think that we have some form of normative pull that is intrinsically associated with the appraisal and feeling of meaning. Examples may help to understand this point. The easiest example we can give is of family and friends. Certainly, we cannot deny that family and friends are meaningful. When we love our family, the meaning here is obvious. We cannot help but to care for them as well. We feel this normative pull when one of them is in distress, but also in simply daily interactions. We seek and think we should spend time with our friends and family. We should help them with small things and even go out of our way to do things that are not required. We may spontaneously feel the normative pull to give them a gift or simply give them a call to ask what's up. These simple actions express both meaning and care. However, we know very well that we both care and find meaning in our interactions with objects or our possession of them. It's not simply with other people. We find meaning in novels, works of philosophy, and even media objects or performances like music or plays. These certainly have meaning, but how is it that we care for these objects and events? What norm do we have surrounding these non personal objects? As a record collector myself, I obviously find meaning in my collection. I remember writing various papers, spending time with friends, and some of the most meaningful moments of my life have been set to the sonic sensation produced by a spinning vinyl. With these memories and the continued meaningfulness of possessing these objects, I take great care of these simple pieces of plastic, going so far as to purchase even more plastic to protect the outside of them properly. Every time I spin one of them on my record player, I make sure that there is no dust in the grooves of the record to ensure that they are preserved. This is a type of care that I have, or a normative sense that I have, which is based upon the meaningfulness of these objects, right? Things get more difficult when we are talking about the musical performance itself that we find meaningful. We remember hearing the joy and awe-inspiring emotion that listening to a live symphony in person, makes us feel. We find significance and meaning in viewing it, if not actually playing in these performances. I mean, if you're a player, the obvious normative pull is you have to practice to get better. I mean, you care for your musical art. That seems quite obvious, but as a listener, it's more difficult, right? Here, the care that is expressed when we have this meaning here is it might be a okay is that we might imprecisely call the normative element here a duty to remember. Imprecisely, it could be a virtue as well. Not committed to any particular normative theory, but you have a duty to remember it, perhaps. Because they are so meaningful, we take great care to not forget them, but to retain that experience. In our normal lives, we take great care not to forget our appointments and various other commitments, and in the same, we take much care to not forget the beautiful musical performances. In fact, so much care is given to the memory of the great performances like this that we have produced the technology to save them, presumably forever, right? This is the root of the vinyl record that I previously told you about, is the fact that meaningfulness and care are intertwined. They care so much about the meaningfulness of this performance that we need to invent a way to save that, to freeze that, so that we can re experiencing it. And that's a type of normative care that's being shown in the face of meaning. And so, with that, I believe that that's sort of my general case, and we'll get more into specifics, but that's my general case for why, when you find something meaningful or you encounter a meaningful event or a meaningful person or have something meaningful in your life, that then that comes with it a sense of normative impulse. There's a sense of care there for that experience or for that object or for that person that comes alongside with them being meaningful.
Okay, that was impressive. I'm just gonna ask for some definitions so we get on the table and
Sure.
know exactly where we stand with each other. So, can you say the definition you're working with for meaning?
Meaning is it would be a subjective personal significance.
Meaning equals subjective personal significance, and
Yes.
what is significance?
I mean, that's going to be determined by person, but something that, colloquially in the trivial sense that you care about, right? It's something that you find meaningful. It can be an anchor for your identity. It can be a memory that you found beautiful. It's something that has meaning. It's self-subscribed by the person. Not everything that everybody that you find meaningful, I'll find meaningful, right? It's subjective
Okay, so then we're defining meaning in terms of subjective care.
in the trivial sense.
Um, as opposed to,
The normative sense of care.
okay, so we're defining meaning in terms of the uh in terms of care in the trivial sense, and then is the argument that care in the trivial sense implies care in the more robust normative sense?
If you're doing such a straight equality, then that would be the case. If you are gonna equate them like that, I would prefer the term significance, subjective significance, as my definition of meaning. And the fact that you find that subjectively significant for your life is what implies the normative sense of care.
Interesting. Okay, so then is there any utility in the distinction between the trivial and the normative senses of care?
Yes,
If
because now that we've established that things that we find significant or meaningful imply that there's some normative duty behind it, that opens up the door for us to investigate that type of relation. What normative relation do we have between things that we care about, the different types of things that we care about, right? If meaning and significance are totally divorced from what we should do, then it becomes unclear why, for example, we should take care in the normative sense of our family, right? If they're in distress, why should we go out of our way to help them? But when we have this meaningfulness invested with the normative, then that becomes much more clear.
I mean, if meaning is just care in the trivial sense, and the proposition we're debating is that care in the trivial sense necessarily implies care in the normative sense, then I mean, is that the claim? Just to be clear, like, is it, does it go one way? Does it go both ways? Is it
I mean, I think it's a biconditional. If you
okay?
normatively care about something, that directly implies that it's meaningful to you.
If you normatively care about something, then that implies that you at least also trivially care about it.
Correct. And that it has a subjective significance for you. Like, you
Right, because that's
subjectively
what that
think.
means. That's what
Right,
trivial care is, right? Yeah.
right,
And
exactly.
then the other way it works is that if you um so what, I can't remember which one was the first one I said. Was if you I think I went with, if you normatively care about something, then you definitely also trivially care about it.
Correct,
It's but is it also the case that if you trivially care about it, then you normatively care about it?
correct. So this is like when you hear a musical performance and you find that meaningful, it's subjectively significant to you. Sort of the normative cash out of that is going to be a type of, inappropriately used perhaps, but a duty to remember it would be the normative
Okay, so
care.
just to be clear, it's not only because I think we need to distinguish this. If we have both because the first biconditional we talked about was, you know, subjective or trivial care. Um, if you trivially care about X, or sorry, you trivially care about X if and only if you normatively care about X.
Correct.
And now there seems to be the further claim that if you trivially care about X, then you have certain obligations
The normative
to
care
care.
obligation. Right. It's a biconditional. You can flop the two. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
No, but what I'm saying is the first one, right, is so let's use an example like I trivially care about soccer,
Hmm.
and on the first construal of this biconditional, that would imply that I normatively care about it. It's um I see myself as as obligated to it,
Not
in certain ways, obligated to
right.
do certain things with respect to it.
Correct. Like watch the games or
Right.
keep
Okay.
up with the scores, for example. Otherwise, you wouldn't have trivially cared about it if you didn't have the obligation.
Right. And it's like me seeing myself this way. So the distinction I would want to make is like on one sense of the robust normative care sense is if I trivially care about it, then I see myself as having certain normative, as that having certain normative moral implications for my interaction with or my conceptualization of or whatever, something
Correct.
related to this thing. I see myself that way. But then the other one would be if I trivially care about something, then whether I see myself or not as having those normative obligations, as a matter of fact, I do.
Correct. I would agree to that.
So, well, which one is it? Because on the first one, then it's impossible for me to not see myself as having the robust normative obligations to X if I trivially care about X. But on the second one, I can be mistaken about what normative obligations I have to something I trivially care about. I can not see myself as normatively obligated to it in any way, although I trivially care
Yeah,
about it.
yeah. See, I agree with both. Like one is obviously a stronger claim than the other one, right? The second one is much more strong than the first one, I believe,
I
right?
think they're also inconsistent.
So, I mean, if you say that you have a personal significance of soccer, using your example, right? But then you say, oh, well, I'm not normatively obliged to keep up with the soccer scores or watch any of the games, then I would argue that you really didn't have an actual care for soccer to begin with, in the trivial
Okay.
sense.
Okay. So you go with the stronger one then, which is
Yeah,
that
I'll take the stronger.
okay, okay. All right. So if I trivially care about X, or sorry, I trivially care about X just in case I not only am I normatively obligated to behave with regard to X in certain ways, I also recognize that, right? Like
Well,
I am obligated.
if you
Go
didn't
ahead.
recognize it, then it would be false that you actually that
Trivially cared
actually
about
had
it.
meaning for you.
Right, that I actually okay, right, okay. So this is interesting. All right. So it's on this view, uh it's completely impossible to just trivially care about something.
Correct.
All right. And I mean, do you want to? I know you gave a long opening statement, but I think like now that we have these clear different versions of the view, like, do you want to give some examples that motivate this?
I mean, sure. So, like, I mean, do you want to do with objects or people?
I mean, let's do one of each.
Okay, so I mean, like with objects, I don't own a car. I cycle everywhere. I get my groceries on my bicycle, and that time that I spend on the bicycle itself, has great meaning to me. It's like who I am. I'm a cyclist is one of the properties that I have, and that has serious subjective significance and meaning behind it. So in the trivial sense of care, I care about my bike, right? It has meaning to me, right? So, like the normative obligations that follow through with that is I take great care to clean my bike when it rains. I make sure the tires are pumped up. I make sure the wheel is true, et cetera, right? The normative obligations. Now, if I didn't take care of my bike and left it out, in the water to get rusted for whatever, then I don't think that it would be true to say that the bike really has a subjective significance to me because I really don't trivially, in the trivial sense, care about its condition, right? I don't give a shit about the bike. And because, those two are together, because I have lacked the normative obligations in the second case, means I don't trivially care. But the evidence here of me taking great care to it points towards the fact that it is actually meaningful to me to keep, for it to have the bike, right? And I mean, examples with people are like tremendously easier. I think that the object is the hardest one to argue, but like if you love a sibling, for example, and then they break their leg, right? By nature of them being a sibling and family being a meaningful significance to you, you're going to go over to them and bring them a meal, help them around the house, for example. That's the normative part, right? And if you decide not to help your sibling there when they were in great need, it becomes difficult for me to say, of course, assuming that you're able to, right? But I mean, if you didn't take care of them when they were in great need and really needed your help, it becomes difficult for me to say that the family there or your sibling actually has meaning to you because you didn't care for them in the normative sense, right?
Okay, yeah. So I mean, those seem like clear examples where your view works. So I'll push back on. I think I have one objection to each kind of case.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether I have more. We'll see where it goes. So, um, in the instance of right, so let's say like my water bottle. It's a hydro flask. You're
Okay.
familiar with the
I have
hydro
no
flask.
idea what that is because I don't live in a desert.
Okay. So a hydro flask is just like a popular um, form of uh, water bottle that keeps liquids extremely cold.
Oh, it's one of
Um,
those insulated things. Yeah, yeah.
right, and they just they have a lot of like cool colors and stuff. And people who have like, I got my hydro flask. It was given to me by my brother, and so like that obviously adds some normative significance to it. Um, but let's say like I just bought a hydro flask with you know some money. Let's say I'm a pretty rich person, and I
Okay.
decided, I could drop like $40 on a really nice water bottle.
Sure.
And uh I really like this water bottle. It's been with me for a while. It's been with me for a couple years. We've been through some stuff together. I've had embarrassing moments dropping it on the ground and it
Of
being
course.
extremely loud because it's metal and it's just fucking insane. But uh one day um I leave it um at a restaurant, and it doesn't occur to me that I left it there until
Okay.
hours later. I go back, I try to find it, and it's just not there, right?
Yeah, but you
So
went back to try to find it.
yeah, I did.
So
But
that implies that it's significant because otherwise you wouldn't have.
I mean, let's say I went back to try to find it just because I had the thought, oh shit, like my life will be a little more tedious if I have just lost this and I have to like go buy another replacement, right?
Uh, Okay, so I mean, could it be true? I mean, so but then it becomes very unclear why you're but then you do care about it because you don't wanna have to buy the replacement, like, you care about it to a lesser in the trivial sense, right? In the trivial sense, the meaning of that water bottle is
Yeah, I
lesser
care
for
about it,
you,
right. That's the point. I do care about it in the trivial sense.
and then you went back for it.
Right. And so the question to
There you
me,
go.
why is that a moral concern, right? Like I have a trivial care for my water bottle. Why is my relationship to the water bottle moral?
Because this is the I mean, what you find meaningful is going to basically define how you're going to act. I mean, it's the very basis of morality here we're talking about. You're going back to the store to get it. It's the very definition of what you should or should not do. It's action guiding. I can't think of anything more moral than something that's action guiding like that.
Okay, you're not necessarily working with like an independent conception of morality that's
I'm
more
not
in
committed
line with.
to any ethical system whatsoever.
Okay. Okay. So I mean, just to get like clear counter examples that people would level out of the way, right? Like, Hitler clearly cares deeply about his Nazi project. Does it imply uh that he has moral obligations to pursue this Nazi project?
Well, obviously, he feels the normative pull of it. Otherwise, he wouldn't be doing it. He thinks that his care for the Nazi project is what's informing his normative,
Right.
to
And
actually go out and do it.
the question that you have to answer is whether that whether it should follow from his caring and his seeing this as action guiding, that he actually has a moral obligation to carry it out.
This is an independent question, right? This is a question about if it's good to find certain things meaningful, right? That's an independent
Well, I
question.
mean, I don't know.
He
If
found
you
it
want to,
meaningful, and then he extracted the norm from that meaningfulness, right? Now, he shouldn't have found that meaningful to begin with, I would argue.
but I mean, was pretty sure that when we talked about the definitions earlier, and you're talking about you're normatively obligated in certain ways,
In a
that
loose sense of obligation,
this was a moral sense of obligation.
it's an imprecise sense of duty. It's not like you have to then follow the categorical imperative. That's not what I'm saying. It just implies a normative sense of care,
I didn't
right?
say I didn't say the categorical
Well,
imperative,
what
but
I'm
I
saying is
mean,
I think you're taking the obligation to be a little bit stronger or too strictly than what my usage of the term meant.
okay, so your use of normative obligation then means what?
I mean, it would be more like a drive to do something or a subjective duty that you subjectively believe that you have, which is normative.
So the claim then is much weaker than I thought it was. I mean, it's not it's the claim that if you trivially care about X if and only if you see yourself or you see X as giving you reasons to do certain things.
Not just reasons, because the stronger part of it is it actually makes you to do it. It's a moral motivation. It's not just an intellectual reason.
So motivating
It
reasons.
has to be motivating. It must be motivating. Because otherwise, I mean, like again, if you don't care for your sick family member, if you're not motivated to do that, that means that they're not meaningful to you, in my view. Yeah, Arco's right. If I have no motivating reasons, then I don't have care in the trivial sense. Yes, correct.
Okay. So
Like
uh,
an example of this would be, let's say somebody says they really care about racial justice in the trivial sense. That is very subjectively significant to them, but then they do absolutely nothing to end racism, that implies that they don't really care about it.
Okay. So if all that you're claiming is okay, wait. So the second um the consequent of the biconditional, could you say it again? So like the antecedent is you care trivially about X.
Sure. And then that implies some sort of normative motivation from there. You gain some sort of action guiding or normative impulse or pull to do actions from that.
Right. But since
The
it's a
duty
biconditional
in a
also,
sense.
right? If
Correct.
it since it's a biconditional, you can't have any motivating reasons to behave in a certain way with regard to X, and also not have a sort of subjective um, interest in or attachment to or like positive evaluation of X.
100% correct.
Okay. So so then it would follow from that that, for instance, if I don't subjectively care about fulfilling a promise I made to a friend because I
Mhm.
forgot about it, then I have no motivating reasons to
Yeah, because you forgot
uh,
about it.
fulfill it.
That's an easy example in my view. That's like the paradigm case of why my view is correct. Because you forgot about it, that doesn't have significance for you,
So
so
wait, so
why
okay,
should you
sorry,
respect?
I might have a different conception of motivating reasons. Could you explain what you mean by motivating reasons?
I mean, it is that which makes you do certain actions. It is that which makes you do certain actions. That's the best way I can describe it. It's a fuzzy term. You're the one who brought up this motivating reasons talk, and maybe you probably have a more technical view of what we're saying here. But it's not necessarily an analytical propositional argument. It
I
may be
mean,
non-propositional.
what? Let
Yeah,
me just look again
it's
at, so I we got here. I just want to see the claim is something that has meaning is something that you care about.
in the normative sense of care. Like, I care for a sick animal. I care that sense of care. It's a normative sense. But it's not necessarily just bound to propositional reasons, right? But it is action guiding. It's like the normative pull.
Wait, I don't see the distinction between the first one and the second one then. I feel like it sort of collapses because subjective evaluation, interest in these sorts of things
So, like, I'll give you some
seem to be
offense.
identical to the
I'll give you
things.
some offense, which I have an answer for that I'm surprised you haven't brought up. So, what if I have a very traumatic experience, right? This is offense for you. I'm giving it to you for free. But this would be a potential counterexample. Is if I had an amazingly traumatic experience, right? That is very significant meaning, right? To me, it shapes me as a person. What normative sense do I have owed or am motivated to do based upon that traumatic experience? It's very significant, but it's unclear why I should care about it in a normative sense. In fact, it seems like the opposite is true. Like, I was expecting,
What? Why? This is not a counterexample. What are you talking about?
because it would be morally significant to you, but you can't have like a duty or some sort of normative sentiment that is brought from that traumatic experience. Like, what normative can you draw from having a traumatic experience that's meaningful and significant to you?
You can have the you can see it as giving you motivating reasons to understand why it happened, to try to act in ways that will prevent that sort of thing from happening again in the future, I don't see why this would be a counterexample. I think what this reveals is that you and I have very different understandings of what's at stake in the debate. Like I'm it seems like the the terms are very slippery and coming in and out of my fingers, and I'm I'm just really unclear as to, like, can you one more time? I mean, I think I have a grip on what the more normative, robust sense of care is
Mhm.
here, but I don't think I know how it's different from the first one.
Well, I mean, that's my claim.
Well, I want to know, like,
But like the ground is that you can so subjective significance alone is I would identify it with the mental, with the mind. It's in the mind alone, right? I care about Formula One racing, right? In my mind, right? That's something I care about, right? In my mind. Right? I care about my family in my mind in the trivial sense. It's exclusively mental under my view. This trivial sense of care or the subjective significance is basically exclusively mental. Whereas when you get the normative sense, and now we're talking about action guiding, and that can, if you want to be dualist about it, which I'm not necessarily committed to, but if we associate the meaning and significance with the mental realm, then the normative sense of care would be the physical realm where action happens.
I don't understand that at all, because the when you talk about motivating reasons, your reasons aren't your actions. Your reasons are what motivate your actions, and those too are mental.
Well, I mean, I would say that barring an inability to act those out in the normative sense of care, unless you're like strapped down in a straitjacket, you're actually going to end up doing those actions. Like that implies that you actually do it.
I don't see how that follows, because certainly you can have conflicting uh, desires. You can have conflicting things that you care about.
Could you give me an example of that?
Yeah, sure. So I care about telling the truth, and I care about not hurting my friend's feelings. My friend asks me a question. I know telling the truth will hurt their feelings.
Yeah, so I would say that it doesn't seem like you really care about knowing the truth, about telling the truth in the trivial sense. You don't that doesn't really meaningful to you then, because you're telling lies
Interesting.
left and right now. It doesn't seem like that was actually meaningful to you. You may have
So
deluded yourself into
no, I
thinking
didn't.
that.
I'm not telling lies left and right. Let's get a higher stakes example. Okay. Um, I can. There are two people uh, drowning in a lake, and I have time to save one of them. One is my mother, and the other is my wife. Right?
Sure.
You're saying that if I don't save my mother, or if I don't save my wife, I don't care about them.
Well, I would agree.
Why?
You didn't really
How is
care
that at
about
all plausible? What do you
them
mean I didn't really care about them?
because you didn't save them. If you really cared about them,
I
you would
could
save them.
only save one. So
Well,
whenever there's
that is the crux of, what is actually meaningful to you. Right there. Like, that is the traumatic life experience that really demarcates what you really care about, what you
are
truly
you
care about.
saying that at any one point I can only care about one thing, and it's basically
No,
whatever I'm doing?
it's just when desires conflict, one is going to win over.
I'm not denying that, but you're making the further claim that when desires conflict,
And you
only
choose
one of
one
those desires only the object of one of those desires can be the object of my sincere care.
at that moment, but later, once you attend the funeral, it's clear that you've regained a sense of care for her in that moment, right? By remembering her, by honoring her memory, right? In the normative actions that you do. right? So in that sense, it can be regained. It's not like it's completely foreclosed to you, but in that moment, the fact that she's drowning, I would say, is not meaningfully significant to you in that moment. You can regain care for things.
So, okay, I mean, if you want to maintain this, I you're certainly welcome to. I just wonder why you think that sort of um this sort of uh this sort of subjective ontology of care, it's a sort of hierarchy in which it's not even a hierarchy, because as soon as one is above another, the lower one just completely drops out of the picture. If you want to maintain this picture, I just wonder, why is this helpful? Or
Because
why not just have a picture where you can care about certain things, and when there are certain conflicts, and after you behave in a certain way, we can judge that you cared about one thing more than another in that context.
I'm not denying that you can care about one thing or well, maybe I hate to backpedal on that. I hate to backpedal. Hmm. I have to think about it. Yeah, well, I mean, the utility of it is, right, is because it explains why you choose actions over another one more easily, I
It
think.
doesn't explain that more easily, because all you need is a picture where you value one more than another in that instant. You don't
I'm
need a picture where you only value one.
I'm not denying the fact that there are levels and you can care for one thing more than another. That would just mean that the obligation is stronger on one end than the other. Like in your
No,
water bottle example.
what? Is that what you said?
Yeah, in your water bottle example, I said that if you don't go back to get it, or for example, I said you just care about it less, right? It's less
Right,
significant to you.
but let's go back to, the mother girlfriend in the lake
Yeah.
example. You
So
did
if
say,
you save the wife, right, for example, then that means that you care that your normative obligations and your care for your mother is less, right? There's less significant to you than your wife, right?
I mean, that follows from your answer to my question, but you did answer that in that moment. Not only do I care about my wife less than my mother, but that in fact I
Yeah,
don't
that's
care
why I
about
said
my wife.
I might backtrack on that. When I said I think I might backtrack for my view on that. But I mean, if you wanna hold me to it, then I am committed to that. But I might
Well, I
backtrack
mean,
looking back.
it seems like it if you backtrack on it, then we need to revisit the original biconditional and see exactly what it means,
Okay.
right? Because to have motivating reasons in the wife drowning example, well, it's not even enough to have motivating reasons. I'm pretty sure the way you characterize it was, these will actually motivate you to act.
Correct. It should motivate you
So
to act.
when
And
you have a case where there's a conflict, one of the things you won't be able you can't be motivated to act, because can't
didn't
you
do
know
it.
you can't act both ways. And so it's going to follow that you don't even trivially care
Yeah,
about the
I think
thing.
that to maintain consistency, I think I have to agree with that, so I don't think I can backtrack. You're right about that. Yeah, I think that that's directly implied. I don't think in that moment you truly care about that. The meaningful significance is your wife that you save, or your mother if you choose to save her. Right? That's the true meaningful significance that you have in that moment.
Okay, I mean, you
You
can
may
have
just
this picture,
disagree.
but it just seems contrary to so many intuitions to me.
I mean,
No.
I think that like the alternative where we have this innumerable amount of things that we care about, right? Where you can still care about everything without having any action to back it up is more strange to me. Because now like everything trivial, right? You can say that you care about anything, but you don't actually do it. So the racism example, right? You can say hey, I care about racial justice, right? But then if you feel no obligation or moral pull or don't do anything about it, I mean, you still have to see it
But
under
those are
your
those
view
are
that you
three
care
those
about
are
it.
different things. Those are different things. The first one is feel obligation or moral pull, and the second one is do something about it
Yeah,
because
well, it works for all 3. Like, you don't have any of those when you're not doing the action, it seems very unclear that
that's
you
not true
actually
because
have a
of the
motivating
conflicting
reason.
values. The conflicting values example shows it's not that I have no moral pull to save my wife and I instead save my mom. It's that I have deep, deep moral pulls both ways, and I have to make a decision.
Sure, but, like, my view has this as the hard example, but when we're saying that you can care about things without there being that normative sense of care there, then, like, I think there's, like, even more simple, um, you know, hypotheticals that your view can't answer for by divorcing the
Okay,
2.
if okay, so that'll be worthwhile. Let's go there.
So that's the racism example, right? It seems very difficult for you to say because you have to claim that someone can deeply, significantly care about racial justice or ending gender-based discrimination, right? Pick whatever you want, right? You have to be able to say, yes, they totally agree and they're super sympathetic. They're very subjective. They have meaning there in that. But then at the end of the day, how has it come that they go about doing something that's in the very conflict with that, right? You
So
have
is
to
what you're
say that.
asking, how can it be that someone, you know, really has these deep moral pulls to do something and yet they don't do anything about it?
Not the deep moral pulls per se. It's not about as they say, "Oh, I really care about inequality," for example. That's meaningfully and significant for me. But then when you transition from the theoretical realm into the actual realm of action, they actually do things that continue to entrench inequality. You have to I mean, under your view, this is completely plausible.
I mean, I didn't give like my view, but what I would say here is because I don't have like a set view on this. I mean, I think
Sure,
this touches a lot on the internalism, externalism debate about moral motivation, which I don't
sure.
think will, I think both are sort of unfalsifiable. Although there is interesting. I posted a paper critiquing internalism based on some um, empirical evidence, but putting all that aside, right? Like I'll just like say because this is true, like I don't have a clear side that I think is more
Sure,
plausible.
sure, but I
So
mean,
it
it's
could so what I'm going to say is it is entirely possible for someone to have to trivially care about something, right? And also to morally care about it, to have a moral pull, but not to act on it because of either limitations in um, their abilities to act on it, or because of um, conflicting desires that are sufficiently strong.
here's another example. Let's take I'll call it the starving child abuse problem. Let's say we have a parent who very obviously, right, cares deeply in the trivial sense. It's very morally significant that they are a mother, father, whatever, that they're a parent, their child has deep significance for them. But then they don't feed the child. Can you really say that that child has meaningful significance for them? I
Well,
don't think so.
it's going to depend on the context, right? Is it like they don't feed the child because they have literally zero money and they themselves haven't eaten in 3 days, and like
Assume that they have money. Assume that they have money. Assume that they perfectly capable of doing something.
in that case, then I don't think I would say that I would say it's more likely that they actually don't care. But
Right.
the the question is, right? I can concede that. Like there's nothing inconsistent in what I've said saying that that's true. But what my view allows me to do is to say that someone cares in a trivial sense and in a deep moral sense about something, and yet because of duress or whatever the circumstances may be, can't
I mean,
act on it or don't act on it.
no, I've already said that, like, if, for example, in my bike example, if I was strapped down in a straitjacket, right, and I was unable to fulfill my moral obligations, right, that doesn't dissolve my equality here. Ability ought implies can under my view.
Right, but earlier you said when we
So,
were
like,
talking about the consequent of the biconditional, that these things actually would motivate you
yeah,
to
and I
act.
said
So I mean,
assuming ability. I said assuming ability. I've said that multiple times.
right. So I mean, let's take a case where someone thinks that veganism is morally required and they, care deeply for the for all sorts of animals. They feel a deep connection to non-human animals. And it's true, literally speaking, that they could go vegan um and not like, you know, uh go broke and compromise their health. But
Sure.
it would be really, really hard for them to do that. They would have to make other sacrifices.
Hmm.
Does it follow that they just don't care about those
Well, this is
animals?
this is my exact situation, right? And I say that I don't really care about. I mean, I admit it, right? I don't really care about the suffering of animals because I make zero effort to actually alleviate that. I don't really care about it in the trivial sense.
But you're talking about you making zero effort, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's say this
If you're
person,
making effort, then that fulfills my biconditional. If you're making effort, that fulfills.
if you're making any effort, it fulfills it.
I mean, if you're making effort to fulfill that normative pull from your trivial sense of care, then yes, that fulfills it. If you're trying to do something, that fulfills it. That shows that you normatively care about it. I mean, like, it's not the case that if, like, a doctor who's treating a patient and ends up not being able to save them from a plight, that doesn't imply that they didn't normatively care for them.
Um, y- like,
Right?
yeah, but then you have a question of, how much is enough?
I I don't need that. My view doesn't imply that there's any bright line that needs to be drawn here.
I mean,
I mean,
presumably,
in your drowning example, swimming 1 foot into your direction of the mother might be enough under my view to satisfy.
okay. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I really don't see the value in the 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 idea that there's no such thing really as like a conflict of values, because whenever we would otherwise say such a thing, it's whatever loses out you don't actually value. I
Yeah, but
don't see that.
I
Go
mean,
ahead.
the problem with accepting the alternative, though, is you have all of these conflicting values, right? But you end up doing something at the end of the day, and it becomes very obscure why you're doing those things.
No,
And
it doesn't. It's not at all obscure. All you say is that you ended up prioritizing this value higher than all the other values in this situation. I don't see how that's strange at all.
I think it leads to paralysis, though, because if you, I mean, do you equally care for your mother the same as your wife? If we assume that in the trivial sense, right? And that's perfectly possible to assume, I think, right? You care for your mother and your wife equally in the trivial
Okay.
sense,
Okay.
right? If we do not have some disappearance of this care, it becomes unclear how you act at all.
This is totally uh opaque to me. I don't see how that follows.
Because if you care about them equally, right, in this experiment, right, The normative pull is exactly the same. So how do you make your choice? You can't. When
You
under
just
my
fucking
view,
pick one. You just fucking pick one.
but that implies that you care about one at the expense of the other. I'll agree to you there that that can happen, right? But in that moment when you're choosing, you don't care about the person you're letting drown. You
So
care about the person you're saving.
you can never be wrong about um what you if say there's a conflict and you make one choice, right? It can never be the case that you look back on it and think, you know what, I made the wrong decision because
That's not true at all. That's
even though
not right at all.
even though I thought I cared more about this person, I actually cared more about the other person.
It's temporally indexed. If you save your wife and then you end up hating each other and get divorced, right? Then of course you can have regret. But that doesn't mean that in that moment that changes what you
No,
cared about in that moment.
no, but that's not what I said. That's not what I said, right? Like, suppose the same sort of thing happens, but um, I just realized that as a matter of fact, I, I saved my mother, but I realized that as a matter of fact, um, in that moment, I was blinded by my sort of um, childhood attachment to my mother,
Right.
right? And I actually don't even have a very good relationship with my mother,
Sure.
right? I couldn't, it couldn't be the case that I actually went with I actually acted on the value which I care about less.
Correct. In that moment, because that blinding, you said the blinding, which is great, because that directly implies that the care in the trivial sense of your wife has disappeared. Like the blinding itself is a metaphor for that very action of that happened.
The blinding doesn't mean that the care has disappeared. The blinding means that you don't see the care.
If you don't see it, it's not there. You can't
That's a
ever,
great argument.
if you can't see it, then it's not there.
I mean, all
I
right.
mean, how can you have
I'm fine ending it on that personally. Like
yeah, sure.
I don't I we're not getting a lot of progress at this point.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm good. I don't really need a closing statement unless you do one.
No, no, I'm good. I'm
Yeah,
good.
I'm good too.
All right.
Okay, if there's no closing statements, then just put an end to it. For the audience that was here for at least 75% of the debate, which isn't very much, but we'll do our best. Just place your vote on who you think performed better overall in the debate. And thank you both very much for debating. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Cool
Yeah, of
Dog.
course.
Thank you, Stone.
Yeah, that hypothetical Arco's right. That drowning wife and uh mother example was a real killer. I don't know if I'm really married to this view per se, but I was thinking about it. So I wanted to see how reactions to it would be.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, always a good thing to test out in a debate.
Yeah, that was the idea behind this. I'm not really married to the view or thought ultra deeply about it. It's just something that was kicking around.